Gary, you were saying that was the moment, a transformative moment. Could you explain what you mean by that?
What I mean by transformative was not that I necessarily believed what Christopher was saying was true, and not that I was going to start looking for alternative explanations, but rather that I realized that what was happening was much greater and much deeper than anything that I could have imagined was possibly occurring. And therefore, I had to take very seriously the possibility that if this continued, we were going to be making a discovery that would certainly lead me to have to reevaluate the way in which I had been trained to look at reality.
Okay, now that's a major statement. So does that mean, I mean, I'm jumping ahead rather, but I'm
Sure.
just picking up on what you've said there. Does that mean you now believe in precognitive dreams?
I think when you look at the totality of what happened in the 10-day experiment, plus what has continued to happen in another experiment that I did with Christopher, plus as I've continued to watch Christopher doing other things which I know are genuine, plus having met other individuals who are in their own way are able to do things similar to, not as great as what Christopher does, but similar to. When I look at the totality of all that evidence, yes, I have come to the conclusion that this is a very real phenomenon and that we have to take it very seriously.
Okay, just going back now to the days one by one, if you like. As I explained to you, we've actually gone back and recreated the what's it called, Kip Peak. Can you tell us about that day in specific? Because I've seen the tapes, and you were very excited by that.
Yes, Kip Peak, was that day 4?
Day 4, was day 4.
Yes, the Kip Peak day was a very special day because Christopher saw many details that were very precise. For example, he saw a solar telescope. He actually constructed something that related to a sun in a telescope. And by the way, how many solar telescopes are there anywhere? And here we were, it turned out, when I actually made the phone call and discovered where we were going. We're going to Kip Peak, which has the world's largest solar telescope. I was also struck by the fact that he got information that was somewhat symbolic. For example, so he saw information about his camera, but he knew from the context of the camera to be able to interpret that concrete image into a symbol, because that's part of what makes him the dream detective, is he knows how to take certain information and he knows how to figure out when is it literal and when is it symbolic. And so I watched him do that. So those details were very dramatic, and it was very exciting to be driving up to the top of this mountain and realizing that he got all these details. It was right. But what I found even more amazing were the things that didn't make any sense. For example, he had this thing about this propeller and this airfield and planes and stuff, and I didn't know what he was talking about. What does that have to do with Kip Peak Observatory? But driving back, we ended up passing this restaurant, and this restaurant turns out to have a little private airfield, and in front of this restaurant is this gigantic propeller. And so there again I was seeing that although the site was the telescopes, he was getting additional information that we could independently verify. How many restaurants do you know of that have a gigantic propeller in front of them that are alongside an airport? Again, the constellation or the pattern for me was very telling.
I mean, there were other events on other days. We talked about the day when you were in Tucson, and there was, if you like, extraneous information there that wasn't to do with the experiment specifically. It was when he had a feeling about the murder of the woman. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Here we are walking down the street. Christopher said he saw parking meters. Well, there are various streets that have parking meters. He said that there were these huge, tall satellite dishes, lots of tall satellite dishes. What was amusing that here we are going down the street, which is downtown Tucson, which has parking meters, which by the way was the only of the 10 days that had parking meters. We walked down the street, and to the right is a gigantic collection of satellite dishes. So it's not just a satellite, not just 2 or 3, but many of them. And as we're walking along, Christopher says, we need to get out of here. And I said, why? He said, well, because there's going to be a murder somewhere around here. I said, Christopher, I said, if there's a murder around here, shouldn't we, for example, look and see whether it's in the newspaper today? He said, Gary, he said, my dreams are very clear. The murder was going to happen later. It was going to be appearing in tomorrow's newspaper. We ended up leaving the area. Sure enough, tomorrow, the next day, just as Christopher predicted, on the front page, which was the only day that there was a murder in Tucson, an elderly woman not far from where we were had been shot like he predicted.
Do you have a copy of that paper, by the way, still?
Yeah, actually, I probably have it home.
Okay, well, so we should get that, and also the microfiche we want to go in.
If I could find it, yeah.
Okay, the other day that you said, speaking to you this morning, that you found extraordinary was a day when, in actual fact, you had half a day, and Christopher predicted that he would end up sunning by the pool, and that came to pass.
It began to dawn on me on day 9 that if there was some sort of intelligent process at work here, that we would be able to test this, because something was happening on day 10 that I hadn't told Christopher. And of course I didn't know it until all of this got scheduled. And that was that I had to be speaking at the medical school at a conference in the early afternoon. And many of these days took us way beyond, certainly into the mid-afternoon. And some of the sites, for example, if we had gone to Mexico or if we had gone to the top of Mount Lemmon or whatever, we would have been gone, and therefore I couldn't attend the meeting. So I said, look, Christopher, I said, if you're right, that there's some sort of intelligence coordinating all of this, then this is going to have to be really close to the hotel. And it's going to have to end very quickly. I said, otherwise you'll have to go with Bill Simon, because he now flew out. He actually wanted to see what was going on. And I said, if this is not being coordinated, we'll know it's not being coordinated because then I'm not going to be able to be present. At which point Christopher drops the bombshell. He said, Gary, he said, my dreams are very clear. He said, in June I dreamt that on the last day we would be finishing very early. I would be spending the day by the pool. And I said, what, Christopher? You dreamt in June before I even thought of where we were going to possibly be going. I didn't pick the sites until the end of July, but he's dreaming in June about where we're going to be going in August, and is being told that on the last day it's going to end quickly. Well, in the information he gets an ROTC kind of building. He sees large trees, he sees green grass, he sees water, some sort of going over a brook. The only place that I could imagine that fit this description was the top of Mount Lemmon. Mount Lemmon was very far away. There was no way that I could go. That meant that he was wrong. This was not coordinated. I would not be part of the process. The envelope was opened, and where are we going? We're going to the Arizona State Museum, which is maybe 6 blocks from the hotel. I said, wow, that's really close. However, the information I thought was wrong. But nonetheless, we drive along. We take the south road because the west part was closed because they were doing construction. We walk along the only way I know, the back way to get around there, and we start seeing these tall trees. I mean, really large trees in this area. And we don't have a lot of large trees in Tucson. We have some. And so I said, Christopher, I said, are these your trees? He said, no. He said, my dream was very clear. He said, it looked like a London park. I said, fine. One of the things, by the way, that's very good about Christopher is he doesn't just own data. The data has to fit and fit what he thinks it fits. Otherwise, he doesn't accept it, which means he's very discerning. We finally enter this area where there's grass and there's these big trees. It turns out to be on Park Avenue. And Christopher says, this is like my London park. Now I'm scratching my head. We now walk over to the area where the Arizona State Museum is, and they were doing construction and they're cleaning down the streets and the water is running along. We have to step over a brook, water, to get there. I said, gee, this is interesting. We walk up to the museum and it's closed. It's closed. The day is over. There's nothing to see on the inside. We've been out 20, 25 minutes. Now I'm really shocked. Because not only is the information accurate, he's going to be by that pool. And as we're walking back, I'm scratching my head. I'm sort of in a daze. And then he says, look. And over there is the University ROTC building, Army Navy building. And it was at this point I said, I give up. There's too much going on in this experiment, and we must preserve it. We must somehow describe it, and someday, hopefully, show it to the world.
Okay. Can you tell us what